The silver fox didn't move when the siren went off. He just stayed there, pressed against the shivering body of a stray cat, snow falling over them both like dust from a collapsing sky. It happened minutes after the explosion. The air still tasted of smoke and burned metal. The blast had come from the old field workshop on the edge of the woods, a storage cabin filled with gas tanks and scrap parts. The roof was gone now, half the walls scattered across the frozen ground. Everything around was coated in a pale, ghostly ash. Rescuers came running from the road. They weren't looking for animals, they were looking for people. But what they found under the fallen porch stopped them cold. A flash of silver fur, and next to it, something small and motionless. "Is that a fox?" one of them whispered. The scene didn't make sense. A wild fox, lying perfectly still beside a stray cat, as if guarding her, while the world burned just meters away. For a moment, no one dared to move. The cat's paw was pinned under a cracked board, her breathing shallow, almost imperceptible. And the fox had wrapped himself around her, tail covering her face from the wind. He looked half frozen himself, but he wouldn't budge. Even when they approached, even when the snow shifted under heavy boots, he stayed. The first camera on a nearby tree had caught the moment the explosion happened. But when the team checked the earlier footage later that night, that's when the real story began to unfold. 3 weeks. That's how long the fox had been coming. Every night, without fail, same hour, same spot under that porch. The cat had been there first, a village stray that no one wanted to claim, already half-starved when winter hit. The fox started by watching her from a distance, keeping to the tree line. You could see his breath fog in the cold air as he waited, eyes glowing faintly in the infrared. At first, she hissed whenever he came near. By the third night, she barely had the strength. That's when he brought the first scrap, a mouse, half-eaten but fresh. He left it beside her, waited, then disappeared. From there, something changed. He began sleeping near her. By the 5th night, he'd pressed close enough that their bodies touched. The heat they shared was the only warmth in that frozen clearing. By the 12th night, snow had piled high and the cat stopped moving altogether. The camera showed the fox licking the frost from her fur, nudging her awake every hour like a nurse refusing to give up a dying patient. Instinct, they said. But no one watching could believe that anymore. Then came the morning of the explosion, the only time the fox didn't leave before dawn. The footage showed him pacing, sniffing the air, uneasy. He'd sit beside her, glance toward the road, then back again. Something in him knew. When the blast hit, the trees shook. A shockwave ripped through the clearing. The porch collapsed in seconds, and in the chaos, the fox lunged forward, using his body to shield the cat from the falling debris. When the rescuers finally reached them, both were covered in dust and splinters. The cat whimpered once, barely audible. The fox tried to drag her free, ignoring his own bleeding paw. He let out a low, broken sound, not quite a growl, not quite a cry, just the sound of refusal. One of the rescuers, Dima, a 24-year-old wildlife volunteer, knelt beside him. His gloves were shaking. "Easy, boy," he murmured, voice cracking in the cold. "We've got her. It's okay." The fox stared up at him, breathing hard, ribs heaving. His fur was singed in places, eyes wild but lucid, as if weighing whether to trust him. Then, slowly, he stepped back. They carried the cat out first. The fox followed, limping. Later that night, while tending to his wound, Dima noticed something glinting in the blood-matted fur of the fox's front paw. He leaned closer. There, wedged deep under the skin, was a thin, rusted tag. Metallic, old, almost polished smooth by time. He cleaned it gently under the flashlight, and faint letters appeared. M03. He frowned. It didn't look like an ID for a wild animal. It looked man-made, deliberate. That's when he realized this fox hadn't just found the cat. He'd come back to her, and whatever M03 meant, it was the beginning of a story no one expected to uncover. The shelter was only a few miles from the blast site, a small wooden building surrounded by frost-bitten trees. Inside, the air smelled of iodine and damp wool. Metal cages lined the walls, each holding a fragment of something broken: a limping dog, a wounded owl, a rabbit with frostbite on its ears. Dima carried the fox in first. The animal didn't fight. He was heavy in Dima's arms, head resting limp against his elbow, breathing shallow but steady. Behind them, another volunteer cradled the stray cat wrapped in a towel. She looked even smaller in the light, her ribs rising like thin wires beneath the cloth. "Put him on the table," said Elena, the shelter's only veterinarian, voice low and calm. She had the kind of tone people use when they've seen too much. When she peeled back the bloodied fur on the fox's paw, she froze. "What is this?" she muttered, pointing to the metal tag. Dima handed it to her, cleaned and shining now under the surgical lamp. It was no larger than a coin, engraved with the faint marks M03, the edges smoothed by time. Elena frowned. "That's not a tracker, and not from Wildlife Services either. So, what then?" "I don't know, but I've seen something like this before. On lab animals." The words hung in the air like a cold wind. Dima looked at the fox, his silver fur, the strange calm in his eyes even under painkillers. "A lab animal? Out here?" Elena didn't answer. She just stitched the wound in silence. The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet. The fox refused to eat unless the cat was nearby. Whenever they moved her cage to clean it, he'd start pacing, eyes fixed on her until she was brought back. They began calling him Ash for the color of his fur and the place they found him in. The cat, frail but stubborn, was called Mira, after a star Dima's mother used to talk about, the one that flickers but never dies. Mira healed slowly. Her front paw stayed weak, but she began to purr again, softly, like she was testing her voice after forgetting how. Ash kept his distance from everyone except Dima. He'd let the young man sit beside his cage, sometimes resting his muzzle on the bars, eyes half closed, breathing slow. There was something unsettling about the way he watched, not like an animal, but like someone who remembered. One night, long after the others had gone home, Dima stayed behind. Snow tapped softly on the roof. He sat on the cold floor between their cages, laptop open, trying to trace the tag's origin. The letters M3 brought up nothing at first, just dead links and scientific catalogues. Then one old record caught his eye, M-Series Behavioral Adaptation Study, Closed Project, 2019. The file was restricted, archived under a local university name he recognized. Dima felt his pulse spike. That facility had been only 10 kilometers away, now abandoned. He clicked what he could read from the public logs. Subject M03, Cognitive Cross-Species Empathy Trial, terminated. The screen went black after that. No details, no images. He sat there for a long time, staring at the word empathy. Then, slowly, he turned to the fox's cage. Ash was awake, watching him. Their eyes met, one filled with confusion, the other with something almost human. "You remember something, don't you?" Dima whispered. "You weren't just wild." The fox tilted his head, ears twitching. Then he turned toward Mira's cage, pressed his nose against the bars, and let out a low whine. Dima swallowed hard. The air felt heavier. Whatever that experiment had been, whatever they'd done to M03, it hadn't been erased completely. By the end of the week, Mira could walk again. Not far, not steady, but enough to move from her blanket to the bowl. Ash followed every step with his eyes. When she stumbled, he pressed closer against the bars, tail flicking anxiously. Elena smiled faintly. "He's her shadow." "Or her memory," Dima said. She looked at him. "You're starting to sound like one of those rescue documentaries." He didn't answer. He couldn't explain what he'd read, not yet. That night, the power went out. The storm hit without warning, heavy snow, strong winds rattling the shelter windows. The generator sputtered, died. For a moment, everything was darkness. Dima fumbled for his flashlight and swept the beam across the cages. Some animals stirred, whining. Others stayed still. Then he heard it, a metallic rattle. Ash's cage was open. "Hey!" Dima shouted, running toward it. The door had been pushed outward from the inside. The fox was gone, the air still warm where his body had been. He turned toward Mira's cage, also open. Tracks in the snow led out the back door, 2 sets side by side. They found them the next morning, near the same clearing where the explosion had happened. The sun was pale, almost white against the ice. Mira was curled beside a patch of melted snow, eyes half closed, purring faintly. Ash stood a few feet away, still as stone, watching her. He didn't run when they approached. He just waited, tail low, as if making sure she was safe before surrendering. Dima crouched near him, voice shaking. "Why'd you come back here, huh? What are you looking for?" The fox blinked slowly, turned his head toward the burned cabin remains, then back to Dima. Something about that look made Dima's chest tighten, like the fox wasn't lost at all. He had returned for a reason. Elena arrived minutes later, breath visible in the cold. "We can't keep him," she said softly. "If he was part of that program, there might be issues, behavioral ones. The authorities will want to transfer him." Dima's stomach dropped. Transfer? To where? A research center, maybe. They'll decide. He looked at Ash, the animal who had risked his life for a broken cat, who refused to leave her side even under falling debris. And now, after surviving everything, he'd be locked in a cage again. "Not a chance," Dima muttered under his breath. He waited until nightfall. Then, when the shelter lights dimmed and the last car left the lot, he opened the gate and whispered into the dark, "Go, both of you." The fox didn't move at first. He just stared, that same steady, searching look. Then he stepped forward, brushed his head once against Dima's leg, and disappeared into the forest. Mira followed, limping, her tail tracing a faint line in the snow. Dima stood there long after they vanished, the wind biting through his coat. He thought he'd never see them again. But 3 weeks later, the cameras in the woods sent back new footage. Same clearing, same silver blur. Except this time, he wasn't alone. And what the camera showed beside him would break Dima's heart all over again. When the alert came from the motion sensor, Dima almost ignored it. It was 3 in the morning, a week of sleepless nights behind him, and the storm outside was worse than ever. But then the name blinked on the monitor. Camera 7, Northern Edge. The same camera that had captured the fox and the cat under the porch. He opened the feed, at first just static, then a shape, faint silver gray moving between the trees, the fox. Alive. Larger somehow, thicker fur, steady movements. Behind him, something smaller struggled to keep up. For a second, Dima thought it was Mira, but when the figure came closer, his breath caught. It was a kitten, tiny, barely old enough to walk, white fur streaked with gray like smoke. The fox paused beside it, nudged it forward with his nose, then looked straight into the lens and as if making sure Dima was watching. Dima froze. The cat he'd set free had been weak but alive. Now there was this new life. He played the footage again, slower. In one frame, you could see the kitten curl under the fox's chest, trembling, and him lowering his head to cover it, exactly like he had done with Mira. It wasn't instinct. It was memory. He sat back, staring at the screen until dawn broke behind the window. Something about the way Ash moved, the way he carried that kitten felt deliberate, almost ritual. Dima needed to know more. The next day, he drove to the university where the archived project files were stored. The campus looked deserted, most buildings sealed since funding cuts years ago. He found the research wing hidden behind layers of dust and broken glass. A single file cabinet had a label that read, M-Series Behavioral Program. He pried it open. Inside, yellow folders, water damaged, filled with short notes and photographs. He scanned each page under the pale light of his phone. M001, Wolf, Baseline Aggression Control Test. M02, Raccoon, Retrieval Training Sequence. M03, Silver Fox, Cross-Species Empathy Adaptation. The last file was thicker than the others. Inside were several photographs. One showed a young woman in a white coat, kneeling beside a fox in a glass enclosure, her hand resting on his back. The fox's eyes were unmistakable, that same silver tone, sharp and human-like. The woman's name tag read, Dr. Mirana Kolev. Mira. Dima's throat tightened. He turned the next page, a progress note written in messy ink. Subject responds positively to emotional distress in other species. Shows repeated attempts to comfort domestic animals placed nearby. Significant bonding observed with feline subject C02, later deceased. Testing halted. Subject relocated to field unit for behavioral observation. He stopped reading. It wasn't a coincidence. The fox's name, the tag M03, and the cat's name Mira weren't chance. The original Mira had been the woman who created him, who had tested his empathy through loss, through watching another creature die. Somewhere in that process, something in the fox's mind had changed. He had learned what grief was. Dima sat on the floor, pages scattered around him. He imagined the moment the experiment ended. Cages locked, lights off, the animals abandoned when the project was shut down. Maybe the fox had escaped years later. Maybe he had spent all that time searching for the face he remembered, not the woman, but something with her scent, her gentleness, her eyes. And when he found the stray cat near the village, weak and alone, he recognized something of her. He had found Mira again. That night, Dima returned to the clearing. The storm had passed, leaving a white silence that swallowed sound. He carried a small camera and a thermal scope, his breath clouding in the air. When he reached the edge of the old porch, the world seemed frozen in memory. The broken boards, the faint smell of soot. Then he saw movement. Ash emerged from the tree line, his fur glinting silver in the moonlight. The kitten followed, stumbling in the snow. The fox stopped when he saw Dima, ears twitching but not afraid. The space between them felt heavy, filled with things neither could explain. "You came back here to raise her," Dima whispered. "You brought her where she was born." The fox looked toward the spot where the porch had collapsed months ago. There, half buried in the snow, something shone. Dima crouched and brushed the frost away. A small metal collar, rusted but readable. C02. The cat from the experiment. The one that had died. The original Mira. Dima's chest ached. The fox had returned not for shelter, not for food, but to lay the kitten where the first Mira had died, like honoring a memory he couldn't let go of. He sat there, snow soaking through his knees, watching as the fox circled the kitten, nudging her gently toward the collar. Then Ash turned, looked straight at Dima again. His eyes were calm, unafraid, the kind of look that said everything without a sound. "You understand now." Dima nodded slowly. He whispered, "I do." When he tried to take a step closer, Ash backed away. He wasn't angry, just resolute. He gave one last look toward the kitten, then slipped back into the forest, silent as smoke. The small white kitten meowed once, confused, turning in a circle before curling against the collar. She looked too fragile to survive the night. Dima knew what he had to do. He picked her up gently, wrapping her in his scarf, and glanced one last time at the trees. No movement, no eyes glowing in the dark. Just snow, falling endlessly over the place where one creature had refused to stop caring. Back at the shelter, Elena took the kitten from his arms without a word. They placed her under the heat lamp, tiny paws trembling. "She'll make it," Elena whispered. "She's strong." Dima nodded, staring at the small body curled in light. "She has to." He gave her everything he had left. Outside, the storm began again, wind howling across the forest. Somewhere beyond it, a silver blur moved through the trees, unseen, unafraid. A ghost keeping watch over what little hope he'd left behind. And on the monitor that night, when Dima checked the cameras one last time, there was movement again. A shape at the edge of the clearing, still, silent, facing the shelter's distant lights. It was Ash. He stayed until sunrise, then vanished into the snow. Winter dragged on longer than anyone expected. The roads froze solid, the forest fell silent, and the shelter became a world of its own, a small island of warmth in a sea of white. The kitten grew stronger. She learned to walk without stumbling, her fur thickening into soft grey streaks that shimmered in the light. Dima named her Luna, after the color she carried, and because, like the moon, she seemed to belong to someone who only came out at night. He tried not to think about the fox, but every time he looked out the window and saw snow moving in the tree line, his heart stuttered, hoping for a flash of silver. Weeks passed. Nothing. Then one morning, Elena found Dima outside, kneeling near the fence, staring into the woods. His coffee had gone cold in his hands. "You still expect him to come back?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "He's still out there," he said finally. Watching. He always comes back. Elena sighed. Wild things don't belong to anyone, Dima, not even to the ones who love them. He smiled faintly. Neither do the kind ones. Inside, Luna meowed, impatient for breakfast. Dima turned back to her, but before heading in, he noticed something new by the fence, paw prints. Fresh, deep, too large for a cat. He followed them into the forest. The air smelled sharp like pine and snow. The tracks led to the clearing where everything had begun. The broken porch was now a mound of ice and moss, but there, at its edge, was a small bundle of sticks, a crude little nest built from twigs and leaves. Inside it, something glinted faintly, the old metal tag, M03. Dima picked it up slowly. It was clean as if it had been licked free of dirt. He looked around, scanning the woods, but there was only wind. Then, faintly, a sound, low, guttural, distant, not a growl, a breath. He didn't chase it. He just stood there, snow melting in his hair, feeling something heavy settle in his chest. The fox had come back to return the tag, to end the story. Back at the shelter, Luna climbed onto his shoulder, purring softly, pressing her small head against his neck. She had the same calmness Mira once had, that quiet certainty that life could begin again, even after everything burns. Days turned into weeks. Luna grew fast, playful, curious. Sometimes she'd stop mid-game, stare at the door, tail twitching. Then she'd run to the window, meow toward the forest as if she heard something no one else could. Dima used to laugh it off, but part of him knew. One night, he was cleaning the hallway when the power flickered. The generator hummed back to life, but the cameras reset. One screen blinked, camera 7 again. Movement. He leaned closer. There he was. Ash, older, thinner. His fur darker now, like smoke more than silver. He stood at the edge of the clearing, half lit by the infrared beam. Behind him, the trees swayed and snow drifted down like ash from another world. He wasn't hunting or watching, just standing there, facing the shelter, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Dima whispered, "You found her, didn't you? You just wanted her to live." As if hearing, the fox turned slightly. For a moment, his breath clouded in front of him, and the vapor seemed to take shape. A small outline beside him, delicate, feline. A trick of the camera, maybe, or something else. He stayed there for hours, unmoving. When dawn finally broke, he lifted his head once toward the light and walked away. The snow covered his tracks within minutes. Dima never saw him again. That spring, Luna gave birth to 3 kittens, all healthy. One had a streak of silver down her back that shimmered when the sun hit just right. Dima named that one Ashen. He never said why. Sometimes, when the nights were too quiet, Luna would sit by the window, eyes fixed on the tree line, tail curling slowly. Dima would sit beside her, holding the old tag in his hand, the letters almost gone now, smoothed by time. M03. He didn't keep it for what it stood for. A failed experiment, a cage, a number. He kept it because it reminded him that empathy wasn't something we invented. It was something we rediscovered over and over, through pain, through loss, through the stubborn act of staying beside someone when every instinct says to run. That winter, the forest was silent again. But sometimes when the snow fell just right, Dima swore he saw footprints appear briefly near the clearing, 2 sets side by side, before the wind took them away. He never tried to prove it. Some things don't need proof. That night, as he closed the shelter and turned off the lights, Luna jumped onto the counter, brushing her head against his hand. He smiled faintly, whispering to her the same words he'd said the day he set the fox free. "Go if you ever need to. Just come back when you're ready." Outside, the moon hung low over the trees, pale and quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a single echo broke through the cold, the soft, rasping cry of a fox. It faded slowly, almost like a lullaby. Dima stood there, listening, until the silence felt full instead of empty. That night, he didn't just remember a fox. He remembered what it meant to keep believing in something you can't see, and to stay, even when everything tells you to leave. That night, he didn't just save a cat. He saved the last piece of his heart that still believed in kindness.